educational facilities. So up in the right, you'll see qualifications in economics and finance. I did a curriculum and administration degree, and then finished up with an urban planning degree to make our communities and our schools work together. I brought integrated curriculum into the package many years ago. On the right, I was that teacher and love it. If I retire, I'll go back to do middle school. But I was a facilities director for a 100,000 pupil school district. 10 million square feet of roofs alone. And finally, worked with an architectural and program management firm because I love this business. And luckily, I've been able to work in some of the best educational communities, including your own, across the United States and Canada and several foreign countries. That's not to boast, but it is to say when I see education and I tell you the things that are going really well here, I mean it and I can defend it, I can talk about it. But when I talk about facilities, I really mean it. I can defend it, and I can talk about it. Years ago, we planned the Disney Celebration School that created the idea of small learning communities. Not small schools necessarily, but the opportunity to use small learning communities to effectively create right-sized schools. We planned the Enloe Magnet High School of America, corporate learning centers, the Brookfield Zoo I mentioned, and other districts like Scarsdale, Hinsdale, Lisle, Illinois. And 8 of the schools in the U.S. News and World Report high schools a few years ago I worked on in one way or another. So the point is, I've seen a trend, and I want to talk about it briefly. This is a pie chart, and it's not perfect because schools like yourselves are all different, but this used to be the distribution of square footage in a school, primarily focusing on support, less square footage in classrooms. Then I defined what I called pace-setting schools. They became schools of the future across many school districts. And in those pace-setting schools, those distributions became different. Why is that important? Because as they become different, our facilities need to go along with those changes, or at least I suggest they do. Okay, what did I do wrong? Okay, an outline of a master plan. What are the 7 components I'm going to touch on briefly? And I know you're saying, oh man, okay, get brief. Okay. I'm passionate though. See, this blue shirt's letting me down. First step, data collection. You want to know the facts of the matter. The next thing, your existing buildings, like I'm going through them, but in much, much, much more detail. Measuring, understanding functions, seeing the building as a whole, understanding your site, understanding circulation. Trends you need to understand. Establish a prototype that becomes your standard. Apply that prototype fairly and equitably to existing buildings or any new buildings. Develop your options and price them out. I'm suggesting those are at least your base starting points for a good master plan. So let's go inside it quickly. When you're dealing with data and collection, many of you do this all day in your work in one way or the other, you need to know your enrollments in this community, where they're distributed and what grade levels they are. You need to understand funding, so you can posture the funding with maintenance and operations, and then be able to shift it effectively to education as it becomes available. You need to know your community. And this is a statement to you. I've never been in a school where there must be 500 people here tonight, concerned about education in one way or another. That says more about this community than I can ever imagine, you can ever imagine. That is tremendous. So community involvement is part of the process that we're doing here and why it has to be part of the planning master plan. Establish a planning committee, maybe many of them, and confirm the planning process. We all agree that if we embark on this path this way, I agree to buy in to the decision. Not back out and say, oh, I didn't really like that idea. I didn't like that answer. Understand your existing buildings, your current facility programs, technology applications, you only got it briefly touched on here, and your goals, but what you can't do because of that darn facility. So up on the upper left, you'll see a master plan of a campus that I did some years ago, and located aspects that were educationally good, educationally in need of help, photographed it clearly, defined it understandably to a lay person. When I did this in a school in Wyoming a few years ago, they said, we want a new school, we got a new school coming, $15 million from the state, a new high school. I went through that high school and I said, wow, these people are expecting a new high school, but you know what? They can put every bit, if not more, of a school of the future in that existing building. Now what do I do? They can wait 10 years to get a new one, maybe, but what was going to happen along those 10 years is what's happening here. Every year they'd fix that roof, even though they'd have to fix that plumbing in the old-fashioned way. They'd go through the heater, on and on. I showed them they could fix that school as a remodel for 25 cents on the dollar. Much cheaper, and the state said not only that, we can do it now. If you're going to save that much money, let's not wait. Now, is everything a good remodel? No. I'm not talking in this district about tinkering around the edges. There are going to be some needs for remodels, some needs for some additions, and maybe new. There are going to be needs to possibly reinvent a school for an alternative use, because it's not going to pass muster. So this isn't a little issue we can walk away from today and say, he said we're in pretty good shape. I'm working us toward the realities of the complexity of this. You need to know your enrollments, you need to know your utilizations, you need to know the programs you're going to teach, the technologies you want to use. And then it's got to be personal in the lower right there. It's got to be right for people. This isn't a company or a machine we're making a learning community. What are the trends in that regard? Technology, of course. Science, I've touched on a few. Integrated learning, your district is doing very well, but not in the facilities that help sometimes. Small learning communities I want to touch on, an emerging trend. I didn't say small schools, I said a small learning community. It feels small, but it allows you to build a bigger building. Let's say 500 students for an elementary, but it feels small to the student. That's the important thing. But you get the economies of scale of being a little bit bigger. You can afford the art, you can afford the music, you can afford the special programs. And then special needs students, I'll come back to that. Very important in this equation. So at the elementary grades, we're trying to now integrate your video and Lego Logo robotics for women, science and advanced science for even elementary kids, which you're doing. Arts and laptops, you're seeing all of that. But how can we reflect it? Many districts are in small learning communities, where like an elementary classroom, you cluster your classrooms around a common area, and then you start sharing between teachers and sharing and integrating the curriculum in what's called a small learning community. This came out very strongly on the planning of the Disney Celebration School, a K-12 facility. And K-12 is a very nice grade configuration. Everybody knows each other, but the school's big enough to be affordable. But you can apply that here very successfully by grade configurations that have right-sized schools, maybe 450, 550 elementary, 600 and a bit, maybe middle, but properly handled in small learning communities, they think they're in a private school. High schools that maybe go a little bit bigger, but that's a little more flexible. Special needs students. We just finished an incredible complex for autism, physical handicap, blind, deaf, emotionally challenged. And the technology is helping those young people, autism in particular, to become very good learners, very good participants in their family is amazing. But the spaces can't be distracting in terms of noise or visual distractions or other kinds of things like that. Again, they have to be clearly understood, designed for properly. So somebody asked me the other, yeah, Frank, yeah, okay, but what's the impact of design on learning? Is there really a correlation? So years ago, I took that challenge and I said, let's do it for the toughest age group, elementary kids. I went into elementary classroom and I demonstrated a picture on the, let's use the top, a rectangle, an oval, and a square. I projected it from different orientations to where the kids sit. What did they see? The child in certain locations saw a square, others saw a circle, and others saw a rectangle because of the angle. You all know that. You look at it from the side, you say, that looks a little distorted to me. But if you're in a classroom trying to learn a basic idea, and your basic information of it, is it a square or a circle, is distorted, or not a square, square and a rectangle is distorted, how can we possibly have good learning? So I took that same question up the ladder to science labs and everything. We had students who couldn't tell a P from an F, a B from an E. Then the room was so long they couldn't hear the instructional television. Why is that? Well, you all took science, some teacher back there knows. The sound emitted by me standing and looking at you, every time I double the distance,